Ryomen Sukuna, the strongest sorcerer in history, versus Gojo Satoru, the strongest sorcerer of today, is the pinnacle of Jujutsu combat. A face-off being hinted at since the very beginning of the story, this fight was something that didn't disappoint. Satoru and Sukuna during their altercation do a multitude of things thought to be impossible by their peers, reinventing what it means to be the strongest multiple times back to back. However, at the end of it all, Sukuna manages to pull one over on Gojo, ending the fight with something deemed the world-cutting slash. What is this variation of this mantle, and how was it able to negate the best defensive curse technique in the world of Jujutsu society? This will be a follow-up to the Gojo video that I did a couple of months ago. While I did intend to release this video during the ending chapters of Jujutsu Kaisen, my school semester completely destroyed me, so I just had this finished script sitting on my desktop. While this video will be similar to the last two that I've done, it will also act as another analysis of Satoru Gojo, the fraudulent one himself. After learning about an infinite series, it's very clear that Gojo and in turn Sukuna's power sets can be more accurately described as they appear in Jujutsu Kaisen. Think of this video as my final explanation, not only for Gojo, but also Sukuna himself. While not necessary, I would appreciate if you watched my last two videos for a better comprehensive understanding. Spoilers for Jujutsu Kaisen and its manga as well. I will be giving a synopsis of Sukuna's progression from Season 2 until about the end of Chapter 236.
集中するのだ。マジか。領域展開。無料空所。
Before going into better detail, I think it's best to revisit Gojo Satoru and his abilities. It'll create a more comprehensible and definitive explanation of the limitless curse technique. In my first video about Gojo, I used the graphical definition of limits to explain neutral, blue, and red, with an infinite, continuous, and infinite discontinuity. However, I'd like to change one definition of the neutral limitless. In the video I made about Jojolian, I better explain that the solution for a limit is instead a number that is infinitely close to a number that you are approaching. With this new definition, the neutral limitless can function normally, assuming that the number you're approaching is where Gojo resides in space. If attacks become a continuous limit as it approaches Gojo from all sides, the attacks will simply reach a number that is infinitely close to Gojo, but never actually reach him. I made this distinction in the beginning as it's weird to grasp this idea if you don't understand it, as it's hard to comprehend the idea of infinity residing within finite spaces. However, these are the parameters I will be using for this video. Not only that, but after finishing Calc 3, you can actually visualize Gojo as more of a three-dimensional limit, as, you know, he's a 3D object. This new effective definition also coincides with how blue is described, as being an amplification of neutral, the implication being that the techniques are very similar, if not the exact same, on a conceptual level.
術式反転赤
Gojo himself explains his power set during Chapter 69 using the mathematical concept of a series. Going off of that, what is a series and how does it work? In calculus, a series is a summation of an arbitrary set of numbers that follow a pattern. If you watched my Jojo video, it's the exact same concept as a sequence, but instead of a new index being generated, the indexes are instead added upon each other. Calculus itself focuses on the concept of an infinite series being the total sum of an infinite amount of numbers, which I think fits considering that Gojo's ability is called limitless. When looking at the application of the neutral limitless, Gojo creates an infinite space between his opponent, making it impossible for objects he considers to be dangerous to approach him. But how does an infinite set of numbers add up to something that is, well, not infinite? Let's say that Gojo is fighting an opponent and the distance between them is about 2 feet apart. How can 2 feet be represented in a fashion that uses an infinite amount of numbers? After all, you can cross 2 feet and it won't take an infinite amount of time to reach the end. That's where the different types of series come into play. A series can come in two forms, being a convergent and a divergent series. If a series is convergent, all of its infinite terms add up to a real number, and this is done in a multitude of ways. The easiest way to comprehend this idea is with the thinking puzzle that is Zeno's paradox, which is also conveniently mentioned in Jujutsu Kaisen. Imagine being given a set finite difference, and you were able to cut it in half, and cut it in half again, and again, and again. As long as this process keeps going, you will eventually reach an infinite amount of numbers that comprise this finite difference. This is essentially what a convergent series is, and this is what Gojo does when using the neutral limitless. The space between his opponent consists of an infinite set of data that he forces any danger to travel through absolutely. Think about it as Gojo dividing a space infinitely with a series and making all the indexes equal in size, forcing objects to actually travel an infinite distance. Considering blue to be an amplification of its neutral application, Gojo, instead of making himself a point of convergence, chooses an isolated point in space and makes that area a point of convergence instead, forcing objects to approach it. Red is also the creation of a series, but instead a divergent one. A divergent series in comparison to a convergent one doesn't encroach upon a single number. When all the indexes are added together, they add up to infinity, which itself technically isn't a number, forcing objects to repel in accordance to any point in space. This series interpretation is considered to be the most conventional explanation for Gojo's power set. After all, the series itself uses it as a base point within the hidden inventory arc. As for purple, the same logic applies from the original video. Despite its later showing, especially with Sukuna, as it doesn't completely destroy him, it's clear that it's not a real delete button. Instead, we can assume that the pushing and pulling of the red and blue together tear apart objects that are caught within the blast. In practice, it's just a giant key blast blender. You can try this out for yourself. Try taking a piece of paper and ripping it simply by pulling it apart, and then trying it again with a different piece of paper, but instead pushing it and then pulling it apart afterward. It's generally a lot easier.
領域展開福間水氏
Ryomen Sukuna is the king of curses. Being hailed as the strongest within the Heian era of Japan, he decided to split himself into 20 cursed objects. These fingers of Sukuna would be safeguarded until 2018, in which Sukuna would eventually be revived. Reincarnating into the body of Itadori Yuji, he would learn of the new era he would be finding himself in, formulating a plan to destroy the society he found himself in. Knowing he would have to eventually fight Gojo Satoru, he decided to reincarnate himself inside of Megumi Fushiguro. Now, being a user of the 10 Shadows technique, he's devised a way to cut through Gojo's infinity. After Gojo's defeat, the variation of Dismantled is described to be able to cut through the space that Gojo inherited, rather than launching the attack toward Gojo. In a sense, the attack isn't conventional, spawning on the target rather than having to approach the target itself. Whether you subscribe to the more conventional explanation of Gojo Satoru with the Infinite series, or the explanation I came up with a few months ago, no, what the fuck? Oh, I left that in a few years ago, Sukuna's world-cutting slash can be explained with both lenses. As a matter of fact, it's actually a simple matter of math notation. If you prefer the limit explanation, the neutral limitless would be notated as such. This essentially means the attacks that approach Gojo will get as close as possible without touching him. It's also important to note that all behavior in math can be graphed by simply plugging in numbers and solving for a designated output. So while a limit as it approaches Gojo isn't actually where he is in space, there has to be some way of knowing where Gojo actually is. And that's what Sukuna learns through Maharaga's adaptation. The limit as you approach an arbitrary number and the actual output of the function aren't the same. In fact, given the right circumstances, they can mean very different things. Assuming that Gojo actually is a being that exists in the world, the limitless would defend him from things that approach him, but not the output of where he actually currently is existing. Sukuna, using Maharaga as a template, is able to take the function that is Gojo's position and find out exactly where he is. Instead of launching attacks toward him, he cuts the f of x of where Gojo actually resides. If you, however, prefer the more conventional explanation using the Infinite series, it's clear that the neutral limitless uses a convergence point of where Gojo resides in any point in space. In order for Sukuna to actually hit Gojo, he'd have to be able to accurately calculate the distance between himself and Gojo, using only the series that separates them. Luckily, depending on the form that a series takes, we can actually calculate the summation of an infinite series. The two series that come to mind are the telescopic and geometric series. Both of these are actually very simple, and because of their simplicity, they provide easy ways to solve for their actual summation. To solve, you will either have to take the infinite limit of a partial sum, or use a partial sum formula for a telescopic and geometric series respectively, both being displayed as such. Now, I won't be actually explaining the work since most of it is algebra, but it's just to demonstrate that if you are given an arbitrary infinite series, and you know it converges, there is a way to solve for the number of convergence. Or in the case of Sukuna, he can, given the right blueprint, analyze the space between the infinite space that is Gojo's technique and devise a way to cut through it. I do want to make a clarification though. There are many other types of series that don't classify as geometric or telescopic, and these series can also converge to a number. However, accounting for the natural patterns that a series will generate, a lot of the time is too complicated and makes it impossible to actually find the specific number of a given series that it will converge to. We don't know what kind of series Gojo creates when using limitless, so it doesn't actually have to be a telescopic or geometric series. I'm simply using both of these series as an example to show that it's possible to solve for a solution to a series when the necessary tools fall into place. All in all, both explanations mean the same thing. Sukuna makes an attack that doesn't travel, instead just starting at where he wants to attack. It's a really interesting thing to think about, as whichever methodology you like the most, whenever Sukuna attempts to use the world-cutting slash, he now has to use hand signs and a bunch of incantations, which technically would be him doing the math to properly attack the location he wants to, by somehow using cursed energy as a medium for math. Turns out the fierce imaginary god also has a PhD in mathematics.
Let's see.
Perfect, sing. I will do what I can.